With the conclusion of Super Bowl 58, the NFL season is over. Since September, we have sat on our couches and watched 10 hours of football on Sundays, 3 hours of football on Monday night, and 3 hours of football on Thursday night. What are we going to do with all this spare time? Watch basketball? Start going to the gym? Hang out with our families? None of these things. Instead, we're going to sit back and reflect upon the 2023 season and dream about September of 2024 when we can watch football again. We are like great philosophers. We think about things that we lost and things that we long for.
A number of friends who've done it and had some profound experiences, and 4 nights of complete darkness.
Unfortunately, not all philosophers are great. The 2023 season was a new era for the NFL. Quarterbacks such as Tom Brady, Ben Roethlisberger, Drew Brees are no longer playing. This has left massive shoes to fill for new and upcoming quarterbacks. 2023 saw a rise of new young stars coming in to replace the Hall of Famers of the 2000s. Records would be broken. Losing streaks would be snapped. Massive amounts of points would be scored. Little amounts of points would be scored. Teams would implode. The refs would not know the difference between the numbers 68 and 70. Backup quarterbacks would rise to take over the NFL. And worst of all, you saw Taylor Swift on every single social media platform you're on. Before the 2023 season even kicked off, one franchise got a massive win. The Washington name redacted / Washington football team / Washington Commanders were sold by Dan Snyder to the Josh Harris Group. Under Dan Snyder's leadership, if you can even call it that, was turmoil. This turmoil included cheerleaders saying that they were sexually harassed on a trip to Costa Rica, and women in the front office saying that Dan Snyder enabled a culture of sexual harassment inside the workplace, and also a naming fiasco where the team was named the Washington football team for 2 years. To top it all off, Snyder was accused of having 2 separate accounting books, one that he showed the NFL and one that he kept for himself so he could keep more of the profit earned from the team. Snyder was subpoenaed by Congress in the summer of 2022. Dan Snyder said that he couldn't make this subpoena in 2022 because he was on his yacht in the Mediterranean watching IMAX movies. Due to this fiasco, the other NFL owners pushed Dan Snyder to sell the team. On July 20th, 2023, Dan Snyder sold the Washington Commanders for $6.05 billion to the Josh Harris Group. Dan Snyder received quite a return on investment because he bought the team in 1999 for $80 million. NFL fined him $60 million right after the sale of the team, not even 1% of the money that he made. Moral of the story: you can do unethical and illegal things. Just make sure you have a yacht you can go hide on in the Mediterranean. The NFL season officially started on September 7th of 2023 in Kansas City, Missouri. The Kansas City Chiefs were raising the Super Bowl banner to celebrate the Super Bowl victory from the year before. Their first opponent was the perennially disappointing Detroit Lions. This Lions team was not like the Lions of old. The Lions finished the 2022 season red hot with an 8-2 record and were aspiring to take the leap to a playoff team. With way too much coffee in his system, Dan Campbell went all in 5 minutes and 31 seconds into the game, where the Detroit Lions ran a fake punt on their own 17-yard line. The message was clear. The Lions were coming for your kneecaps.
We're going to get up, and on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off.
The Lions used this aggressive attitude and Kadarius Toney not being able to catch to snag a 21-20 victory from the Chiefs on banner-raising night. Later in the week, the New York Jets were facing the Buffalo Bills in MetLife Stadium in New Jersey. The Jets were viewed as off-season winners, acquiring Super Bowl champion and 4-time NFL MVP Aaron Rodgers from the Green Bay Packers. Rodgers took the field for the first time as a New York Jet, carrying the American flag out of the tunnel in remembrance of 9/11. That was the best highlight of the Jets season, as Aaron Rodgers tore his Achilles on the 4th play of the game. The shell-shocked Jets were able to rebound and pull off an overtime victory with a miraculous 65-yard punt return by undrafted rookie Xavier Gibson, their second best play of the season. Xavier Gibson wasn't the only Week 1 impact rookie. In Week 1, a little-known 5th-round rookie from BYU caught 10 passes for 119 yards. To prove that this wasn't a fluke, Nacua caught 15 passes for 147 yards in Week 2. Puka continued to play well through the rest of the year. He finished the season with 1,486 receiving yards, an NFL record for a rookie, a Pro Bowl nod, and finished as the best wide receiver on his team. Pretty impressive for a team that has Super Bowl MVP Cooper Kupp. Puka's 2023 NFL season was so good that in any other season he would have won NFL Rookie of the Year easily. Unfortunately for him, C.J. Stroud was also drafted this year. C.J. Stroud was drafted second overall to the Houston Texans, a team that had won a combined 11 of 38 in the previous 3 seasons under 4 different head coaches. C.J. Stroud united with first-time head coach DeMeco Ryans and took the NFL by storm by throwing for 4,108 yards and 23 touchdown passes. C.J. Stroud was viewed as one of the top 10 quarterbacks in the NFL, just 8 weeks into his career. Stroud also led the Texans to a division title and a playoff victory, an unprecedented leap for a team that had went 3-13 the year before. C.J. Stroud has single-handedly brought hope to Houston again, and he did it without banging on trash cans. Speaking of franchise quarterbacks, the Green Bay Packers found another one. This was supposed to be a rebuilding season for the Packers. The Packers traded 4-time NFL MVP Aaron Rodgers to the Jets and gave the reins of the offense to 2020 draft pick Jordan Love. The season started rough with the Packers going 3-6 in the first 9 weeks of the season. Packers fans were calling for Love to be benched. Then Jordan found the magic that only Love can bring. The Packers rallied and finished the season winning 6 of their last 8 games. Jordan Love found his stride and threw 18 touchdowns to just 1 interception during that time. During the last 8 weeks, the Green Bay Packers found a franchise quarterback. The Green Bay Packers found yet another franchise quarterback. In the past 31 years, they've had questions about the quarterback position for 8 weeks. 8 weeks! As a Broncos fan, I've had questions about the quarterback position for the past 8 years. Green Bay, you already know you're only going to get 1 Super Bowl ring out of him. Another unlikely franchise quarterback emerged this year. Quarterback Baker Mayfield. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers were $80 million over the cap coming into this season. With Tom Brady's retirement, the Buccaneers took a flyer on Baker Mayfield for $4 million. Mayfield's NFL career has been a bit of a roller coaster, but not the fun one. After being drafted in 2008, first overall, and winning the only playoff game for the Browns in 28 years, Mayfield was traded to the Panthers. After playing 7 games for the Panthers, he was cut and claimed off waivers by the Rams. Mayfield signed a last-chance contract for the Buccaneers, and he made the most of it. Mayfield threw for 28 touchdowns, 4,044 yards, and 10 interceptions, and saved his NFL career. Mayfield arguably played better than Tom Brady did the year before. Mayfield led the Bucs to a division title and won a playoff game. This now gives Baker Mayfield 2 playoff wins in the past 6 years. The Cleveland Browns, the team that he wasn't good enough for, have won 1 playoff game in 28 years, and Baker Mayfield won that game for him. What were you doing, Cleveland? The Carolina Panthers also proved it wasn't Baker Mayfield's fault that they stunk while he was there. This year, the Panthers went 2-15. The Panthers led for 0 offensive snaps this season. Let me say that again. The Panthers led for 0 offensive snaps this season. The highlight of the Panthers season was David Tepper acting like a man-child and throwing a drink on a Jacksonville Jaguars fan. The NFL acted super harshly and fined David Tepper $300,000 for the incident. David Tepper is valued at $20.6 billion. That's like finding you and I a penny. It's nothing to him. With Dan Snyder out, Tepper has cemented himself as the worst owner in the NFL. Last offseason, the Panthers traded a 2024 first-round pick and wide receiver DJ Moore to the Chicago Bears to move up to the first overall pick. The Panthers drafted Bryce Young and finished the season with a 2-15 record. This move was clearly a mistake by the Carolina Panthers, especially with C.J. Stroud being picked right after Bryce Young. C.J. Stroud is already accepted as a top 10 quarterback in the NFL, and Bryce Young is struggling. It is rumored that the Panthers front office and coaching staff wanted to draft C.J. Stroud instead of Bryce Young, but the man who signs the paychecks, David Tepper, insisted that they draft Bryce Young instead. Even worse for the Panthers, they lost their 2024 first-round pick, which ended up being the first overall pick in the draft. Quarterbacks are mocked to go picks 1, 2, and 3. The Panthers just could have waited a year, not traded so much, and gotten a quarterback this year. But instead, the pick belongs to the Chicago Bears. Unfortunately, it isn't all sunshine and rainbows over in Chicago either. The Chicago Bears finished the season 7-10, a major disappointment for what they were expecting coming into the season. They only looked good towards the end of the season and were one of the worst teams in football at the beginning of the year. Even worse, the Bears were the first team to face the wrath of Taylor Swift. As we all know from seeing it on social media 500 times, Taylor Swift is dating Travis Kelce. The NFL knew they had to capitalize on this opportunity, and the Bears were the first victim. This season, Swifties learned that NFL stadiums are used for something else other than the Eras Tour. NFL viewership amongst teenage girls increased by 53%. The NFL also brought in an extra $331.5 million worth of revenue, thanks to Taylor Swift. The Swifties also made this abomination. What is this? This is terrible. Hey Taylor, if you're watching this, I need you to do us a favor, okay? The least you can do for being on our TVs unwantedly is to at least teach Travis Kelce how to sing. You're right! If I have to watch this Neanderthal win Super Bowls, I at least need to be able to tolerate his voice. I'm pretty sure my ears were bleeding after the 5th Viva Las Vegas. Viva! Viva Las Vegas! Back to happier topics that don't make my ears bleed. For the first time ever, the New York Jets beat the Philadelphia Eagles. Since the Jets and the Eagles started playing in 1973, the Jets have an 0-12 record against the Eagles. But this year, the Jets finally won. The Houston Texans are now the only team in the NFL to not have at least one win against every other team in the NFL. To end another significant streak, the Denver Broncos finally beat the Kansas City Chiefs, ending a 16-game losing streak against their division foe. It had been 2,965 days since the Broncos' last victory against the Chiefs. All it took for my Broncos to prevail was Patrick Mahomes getting the flu. Speaking of the Broncos, they had an interesting season this year, especially the start. During the offseason, the Denver Broncos traded a first-round pick to the New Orleans Saints to hire Super Bowl winning coach Sean Payton. Sean Payton got right to work fixing the culture in Denver. He had this to say about the job that the previous coach did. Everything I heard about last season, we're doing the opposite. Sean Payton also said that Nathaniel Hackett did one of the worst coaching jobs in the history of the NFL. Unfortunately for Sean, life caught up to him very quickly, as the Broncos lost to the Dolphins in Week 3, 70-20. The Dolphins racked up 726 total yards, averaging 10.2 yards a play. 350 of those yards were on the ground, with 8.1 yards per rush attempt. It was one of the worst defensive performances ever, since the Dolphins' offense scored all 10 touchdowns. The Dolphins even showed us mercy at the end. They decided not to kick a chip shot field goal at the end of the game that would have given them 73 points, an NFL record. Despite this beatdown, Broncos Country finally started to ride.
Broncos Country, let's ride.
In Week 7, the Denver Broncos beat the Green Bay Packers and kicked off a 5-game winning streak, where 4 of those teams they defeated were playoff teams at the end of the year. Unfortunately for the Broncos, it was a little bit too little, too late, and the Broncos finished 8-9. In Week 14, we got to watch one of the worst displays of football ever. The Las Vegas Raiders and the Minnesota Vikings participated in the lowest scoring game ever during the Super Bowl era, with a final score of 3-0. The last time a game finished with a 3-0 score was in 2007, where the Dolphins and Steelers played in a game called the Mud Bowl. The Mud Bowl was played in a torrential downpour, and the field was so wet that the football did this. The Vikings and Raiders didn't have the excuse of terrible elements, because their game was played in an air-conditioned dome. If you like punters, this was the game for you, as 17 punts were exchanged between the two teams. Finally, 58 minutes into the game, the Vikings mercifully put us out of our misery by kicking a field goal. There were 8 NHL hockey games played the same day that the Vikings and the Raiders played. 6 of those games had more points scored than the Vikings and Raiders game did. Reminder, the hockey goals count as 1 point. One of the worst displays of offensive football we have ever seen. Ironically, 4 days later on Thursday Night Football, the Raiders scored 63 points against the Los Angeles Chargers in that very same stadium. Chargers, you always find a way to be terrible. Terrible is a great adjective to describe the end of the Eagles season. Coming into the 2023 NFL season, the Eagles were viewed as favorites to make it to the Super Bowl. Initially, the Eagles lived up to the hype, starting the season with a 10-1 record. The Eagles then lost their next 2 games, defensively allowing 42 and 33 points. After these 2 losses, the Eagles changed defensive coordinators in Week 15, turning their hopes to the pencil, Matt Patricia. When your only hope is Matt Patricia, you know it's over. With Matt Patricia defensive coordinator, the Eagles finished the season 1-4, with the easiest strength of schedule in the NFL during that time frame. The defense went from being first against the run in Week 10 to being 31st ranked rush defense for the remaining games. The Eagles became the second team in NFL history to not reach 12 wins after a 10-1 start. The Eagles went on to lose in the first round of the playoffs, and their disaster at defensive coordinator and offensive coordinator were fired. Speaking of disastrous coordinators, there was no greater disaster this year than Pittsburgh Steelers offensive coordinator Matt Canada. Under Matt Canada, the Steelers offense was ranked 30th in yards and 29th in points scored per game. Steelers fans voiced their displeasure at a Pittsburgh Penguins hockey game when the crowd started chanting this. And Steelers kicker Chris Boswell said this to Canada right after a victory. In a cruel twist of irony, the game after Matt Canada was fired, the Steelers had more than 400 total yards of offense, ending a 58-game streak without having 48 total yards of offense. That was the second longest streak in NFL history. One of the biggest storylines of the 2023 NFL season was the Zebras. The officials were absolutely terrible this year, and they got started in the first game of the season. Against the Lions, the officials let Jawan Taylor line up in the backfield on almost every single passing play. They also missed key false starts throughout the game. The refs also have no idea what pass interference is anymore. These two plays were not called pass interference. But this one was called pass interference when the pass was clearly uncatchable. In the Eagles and Dolphins game, the Dolphins were penalized 10 times. The Eagles, however, were penalized 0 times. And there were penalty-worthy plays on the Eagles during the game. This right here is pass interference. It's also a face mask. And this right here, Lane Johnson is obviously holding. This should have been called. The officials also don't know what personal foul penalties are anymore. Right here, this was called roughing the passer. But that very same game, this was not called a horse collar. And this play right here, this was called unnecessary roughness. This is a textbook clean hit leading with the shoulder. But anytime Justin Fields has the ball, he doesn't get any penalties. The officials absolutely hate Justin Fields, and I have no idea why. He never gets calls in this league, calls that any other quarterback would get. The refs don't even know where the field of play is anymore. They called Amari Cooper out of bounds right here. He never touched the white line. He was in bounds the entire time. But worst of all, the refs were getting called out here. Kadarius Toney was clearly offsides. He was lined up almost a yard into the defensive backfield. But players are up in arms over this play. That was the one time the officials got something right. Let's not criticize them for getting something right. Unfortunately, these are just minor misses compared to what happened in some of the other games. In prime time, the Chiefs and Packers played. The officials on the final drive missed almost every single call that they had. Right here, they called a late hit on Jonathan Owens. Patrick Mahomes was still in bounds. Just 2 plays later, the refs forget what pass interference is. Marquez Valdes-Scantling is clearly interfered with here, but there's no flag. Maybe it was a makeup call. Just 2 plays later, MVS was ruled as going forwards here when he was shoved out of bounds. MVS was not going forwards. The clock should have kept running instead of stopping, but instead the officials let it stop, giving the Chiefs another chance. The worst part is, this wasn't even the worst officiating moment in the 2023 NFL season. That happened when the Dallas Cowboys and the Detroit Lions played, and the refs messed up because they don't know the difference between the number 68 and the number 70. The play happened when the Detroit Lions went for 2 here, and they converted. The refs decided they wanted to throw a flag for illegal touching because the offensive lineman did not report in as eligible. The problem is there's footage of 68 going up to the official and telling him that he reported in as eligible. Dan Campbell even warned the officials that a play like this might be happening. Apparently, it is hard for officials to recognize who is talking to them and what number they are. I would think it would be easy to tell the difference between 68 and 70. These are skills that we develop in the first grade. Despite the terrible officiating week to week, the biggest story this year were the backup quarterbacks. 66 different quarterbacks started a game this year. There were only 9 starting quarterbacks who played all 17 games. American hero Gardner Minshew played in 13 games this season and was a drop pass away from leading the Colts to the playoffs. New York legend Tommy DeVito, aka Tommy Cutlets, replaced Rocky Balboa as America's favorite Italian athlete and proved to everyone everywhere that it is still cool to live in your parents' basement and have your mom make your bed for you each morning. There is also the rise of Jake Browning, who led the Bengals to a 4-3 record when Joe Burrow got out and kept their playoff hopes alive. But one of the best backup quarterbacks this season was Josh Dobbs. In a league full of great hair for NFL quarterbacks, Josh Dobbs proved that you didn't even have to have hair at all to be a baller in the NFL. Josh Dobbs, a man with an aerospace engineering degree, came down from space to throw the football. Josh Dobbs used that big brain of his to ruin the chances of the Cardinals getting the first overall pick in the draft by beating the Dallas Cowboys in Week 4. Josh Dobbs was then traded to the Vikings on Halloween and had to play on November 5th. Nevertheless, Josh Dobbs led the Vikings to a 31-38 victory over the Atlanta Falcons, throwing for 2 touchdowns and rushing for another. The crazy part about that Falcons victory, Josh Dobbs didn't know the routes his receivers were going to be running. His coach had to tell him what his receivers were going to be doing before the play started. The Passtronaut soared high, leaving him to be one of the best stories of the 2023 NFL season. But none of these backup quarterbacks were elite. That title is reserved for only one man, 38-year-old Joe Flacco. At the start of the 2023 season, Joe Flacco was at the same place you and I were, sitting on our couch, watching football. But the Browns called, and Joe Flacco donned the Mr. Elite cape once again. Joe Flacco instantly reverted back to 2014 form. He threw for 1,309 yards and 13 touchdowns, and led the Browns to a 4-1 record and a playoff appearance. For his efforts, Joe Flacco won Comeback Player of the Year. Cleveland, you need to build this man a statue. He is the best quarterback your franchise has ever had. And yes, I know he only played 5 games. The best part about these storylines, it all happened in the regular season. We haven't even started talking about the playoffs yet. In the playoffs, the Chiefs and Dolphins played the 4th coldest game in NFL history. At kickoff, the temperature was -4 degrees, with a wind chill of -27. It was so cold that 15 people were admitted to Kansas City hospitals due to cold-related injuries. Look at the picture of the beer. The beer was freezing. It was so cold that Patrick Mahomes' helmet became brittle and cracked during the game. It was so cold that the Dolphins decided that they didn't even want to play the game. They decided to forfeit 27-7 and let the Chiefs win. That way they didn't have to go out in the cold. It was also the first time in NFL history that a 7th seed team has won a playoff game. The Dallas Cowboys kept the January tradition and decided not to show up when they need to. The Green Bay Packers went to AT&T Stadium and ran the ball all over the Dallas Cowboys. Aaron Jones finished the game with 118 yards and 3 touchdowns. Dallas, I thank you for holding to tradition and always choking in the playoffs. Another first for this year, the Lions won the NFC North. The last time the Lions won a division was in 1993, and the division was called the NFC Central. Since the Lions won the division, they got to host a playoff game where they welcomed former legend Matt Stafford and the Los Angeles Rams. The Lions and Rams played a back-and-forth game, with the Lions squeaking out a victory in the end. The next week, the Lions played another home playoff game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which they won, which advanced them to the NFC Championship game. The Lions had not played a home playoff game since 1993, and in the year of our Lord 2023, the Lions played 2 playoff games at home. The week of the NFC Championship game, the Detroit Lions were considered America's team. The Detroit Lions were considered America's team. How did we get here? This has never happened before. With all these unlikely heroes, with all these new underdog teams, what 2 teams made it to the Super Bowl this year? Oh, the Chiefs and the 49ers. At least tell me this time, for the sake of parody, that the 49ers won. Oh, they didn't. Well, this is the same script as 4 years ago. I guess some things do never change. Despite the predictable ending, the 2023 NFL season was a refreshing chapter in the NFL story. Trends were broken, new faces stepped into big roles, old names moved to new teams. Records were broken by unlikely candidates. Teams won games that they never had before. And worst of all, Swifties think it's easy to win a Super Bowl, as they did it in their first season. Thank you for watching the 2023 NFL season in reflection. If you enjoyed the video, like, comment, and subscribe to see more. Thank you.